Welcome to the Uplifters podcast. I'm Aransas, and today I'm so excited for you to come hang out with me and my friend Lakshmi Rengarajan, the host of the Later Dater Today podcast and a dating coach who specializes in helping people navigate romance in midlife. She brings such a refreshing perspective to dating after 40 and really challenges some of the urgency and maybe kind of desperation stories. You're going to hear in this conversation why standard dating advice fails midlife daters, some questions that you can ask to help cultivate meaningful connection. And these are really powerful, whether you're dating romantically or just like friend dating. And the power of our own unique individual stories in forming deep and meaningful relationships. Lakshmi's work in modern dating spans several chapters. She began designing in-person events for singles way back in the 2010s, went on to work at Match.com, and then was hired at WeWork for a first of its kind job as the company's director of workplace connection, a term that she actually invented. Whether you're newly single, have never married, or just curious about redefining relationships on new terms, I hope this conversation will give you some practical strategies and maybe a fundamental mind shift in how we think about love, connection, and possibility at every age. Hi, friend.
Hello.
Hi. Well, we met way back in our lives as coach
Pre-pandemic.
trainees, pre-pandemic,
Pre-pandemic, yes.
getting some certifications as professional coaches.
Mhm.
And we got to coach each other and collaborate.
Yes, but you were the one in class that was like, I think what this is, and then you would distill everything into like a 20-second thing that everyone would be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. That was you.
I like being known as that person.
Yes, yes.
You were the person who asked the really tough questions that sometimes made the instructors stop and think and made us all stop and think. And the more I know you, the more true I know that is who you are.
Yeah, that can be a good thing.
It
Not
can be a
so
great
good
thing. The
thing.
world really needs those people. And I'm really glad to have
Oh,
someone like
thanks,
you in my life who
Aransas.
asks hard questions about things that I might not even consider asking.
That's I mean, as someone who coaches people in dating, that's probably a good skill to have.
Yeah. Yeah. And since you bring up dating, your podcast, The Later Dater Today,
Mhm.
your work and dating have taught me so much about what gets in our way when we think about partnering and how we overcome our limiting beliefs and our fears to allow ourselves to connect
Mhm.
professionally, personally, and watching you obsess over those details has made me more thoughtful and intentional. And so, as we kicked off this series on late bloomers, when I was
Yeah.
thinking about who we needed to hear from, one of the first names that came to my mind was Lakshmi Rengarajan, because I know you have thoughts and
Oh,
they
I
will be
have
meaningful
thoughts.
for us. Yeah. So, why did you decide to focus your podcast on dating specifically?
When I started it 3 or 4 years ago, I was coming off of the podcast that I'd hosted for Vox Media, which was about the history of the dating industry. I had spent so much time watching dating, and I noticed that everything about dating culture, everything about dating advice, was was stemming from who I call the standard dater. And the
Mhm.
standard dater is that person that's sort of like in their 20s or 30s, and they are, kind of thinking about marriage, long term relationship, maybe building a family. And so, because the information is organized around that outcome, it has deadlines and it has a sense of urgency and it
Mhm.
has this sense of like you have to find out who the good people are and the bad people are, and you have to label things. And that framing gets copy pasted and then applied to people in their 40s and 50s. And then that's where it doesn't actually serve people.
Yeah.
Because whenever, same thing with marketing or with health, whenever we orient around the 28-year-old or the 32-year-old, we miss out.
Uh-huh.
And it's not the most useful information. So my base thing was, what if you centered the 40 and 50 something? What if you centered their experience? And then how would the discussion fundamentally change when you didn't center marriage and the pursuit of family as a primary reason for dating?
What paradigm shifts were there when you started talking about this specifically with older daters?
I mean, so many things. One was just when I'm on the podcast or when I'm talking to people, the first thing is just even just that realization. Because a lot of times people, whether they have married or not, they're picking up a version of themselves that's in some ways 20 or 30 years old. And sometimes everyone needs a hard factory reset and to just rethink relationships fundamentally. What
Hmm.
is it that you want now? And how much of that is what you want? And how much of that is actually old programming or things that other
Mhm.
people have told you that you should want because they're operating on old programming?
Mhm.
So I mean, the amount of things that I have learned is like just unbelievable. And then the last 2 years, I focused my research focused exclusively on interviewing and studying men, straight men, because I really felt like they were an understudied group and sometimes misunderstood. And so I spent a lot of time doing that. But like I think the most fundamental thing is that you're not dating on what I call a deadline anymore.
Mhm.
And that is actually a huge advantage.
Mhm.
And so there's no reason to rush. There's no reason to feel like you don't have time.
Mhm.
And I think that that's a huge advantage that sometimes people don't see. And you can really shape it for what you want. Like, a lot of times I have clients who are like, oh, but we have different custody schedules. And I was like, sure, that's fine. But how many times do you really need to see each other? And for what duration? And what is the quality of that time? And people sort of realizing, like, oh, yeah, I get to like map this out from scratch all over
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
And so that's really exciting just to see people have that realization that whatever they thought was doesn't have to be moving forward.
Yeah, I love that, and so if, like, in your 20s, subconsciously even, the expectations are, "I'm on this reproductive clock,
Correct.
and I
Yeah.
must mate by this age in order to become a parent. I'm looking for somebody who has financial stability so that we can co-create a sustainable life together," right? If you throw out all of those because maybe you've achieved your own financial
Yeah.
stability or you have approached parenting in whatever way you've chosen
Right.
to at that point by 40s and 50s, whether it's to have, to not have, to adopt, but to be an aunt or an uncle, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
just sort of freeing yourself from those assumptions and then saying
Exactly.
what's right for right now, which is maybe my favorite question in the whole
Yes.
like lexicon of the universe.
Exactly. What is right for right now? And I think that applies so much to dating. And I think it is
Mm.
I think it's such a liberating space. And I think it's such a creative space.
Yeah, say more about why you use those 2 words.
Because again, I think to be able to really ask yourself, what does a relationship mean to me today in this body at this time, right? This is also a unique time. Relationships are optional.
Mhm.
So, what is it that you actually want? Who do you want to become in a relationship? And what purpose does it serve? And also, like, how do you want to be a part of someone else's story?
Are you getting into a relationship because you want somebody to travel with? Does that person need to be a romantic partner, or might they just be a friend? A
Yeah.
friend and I actually were talking last week about how as humans, many of us, I won't say all of us, but many of us have this deep need for an exclusive pairing.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think we have historically assumed that needs to be someone with whom we are sexually and romantically invested. And yet, for many people, really the answer is they just want an exclusive partner, like a real BFF or somebody with whom they can feel like I'm your person.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like most people just want a certain degree of clarity.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think when you're younger, I think sometimes that clarity is a little bit more clear.
Mhm.
And I think as you get
Mhm.
older, because this is the like not, this is the downside of it is that because there's no rules, you actually have to guide that conversation.
Mhm.
and be okay with a certain degree of either not clarity or figuring it out together.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so it's like a double-edged sword. It's awesome, but then you also have to have the willingness to surf that with somebody else.
And
Mm-hmm.
so it is about communication at the end of the day, and being able to say to ourselves, this is what I really, truly want and need, and being willing to share that with another human being and say, this is what I truly want and need,
Yeah, I
instead
would say,
of hiding it and dancing around it like we are apt to do.
yeah, I think like one thing I might say is like before the communication, I think is connection.
Mm,
I think sometimes people get into this is what I want too quickly.
so good. Such a good point. Yeah.
And I think this is where a lot of the dating advice I think is misdirected, where it's like, well, I'm looking for this. I'm looking for a long-term relationship. I want this. I want that. And it's like, you haven't even finished your latte. You're already making demands. And I think people have this idea, back to your original premise, is like, well, I don't want to waste time with the wrong person. And I think that belief or that statement or that advice like seems sound on the outside and is actually incredibly destructive for people when they're dating. So much of what I have to do with people is to sort through quite frankly, all the garbage they've ingested about relationships and bad dating advice for 25 years and being like, okay, which of these really makes sense for you? And maybe coming out in the first 20 minutes and saying, well, I'm only looking for long-term relationships is actually the thing that will prevent you from getting into a long-term relationship.
Yeah. And one of the things I say a lot about everything, careers, relationships, you name it, is not everything needs to be everything.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And not
so
everything
maybe
needs to
this
be
person is
stated.
just great for a latte for today, and just enjoy the latte and be in the moment. And then you can get curious about whether or not you want to have a second latte with this person.
Right. Because really that is an attempt to control the situation.
Yes.
Maybe instead of that, why not just focus on getting to know who this person is, who's sitting across from you, right? Which is the real art, the real skill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What happens when you say to people, hey, maybe the way you've been thinking about this is not serving you?
Yeah. Usually I get a lot of pushback initially.
Well, nobody's ever offered an alternate reality or
No.
narrative.
And it's really interesting that you say that. All of my clients come through my podcast. So they're like bought in. It's usually people that are not my listeners where I get the resistance. Like people I just meet out in the world at dinner and they're like, oh, you coach midlife daters. And then they're like, that's the person I have to like contend with. The people that end up coming to me are very bought in. But I would say at a high level, when I'm working with people, generally I'm working with very successful, accomplished people who at some level have some kind of rubric in their head of how things are supposed to unfold, or how things are supposed to work. And the problem is most of those rubrics do not work in dating at all. In fact, they work against you in dating. And so I think a lot of the times what I'm running into is people who think they can date, who think they know how to date, but actually don't. And so that is like not something that people think to consider, because it's like, well, isn't dating just like going to dinner and like talking to someone and seeing if you like them? And that's the furthest thing from the truth.
Okay,
Dating
what
is
is
this
it?
like, it's a very, very beautiful, subtle art of connecting with someone and getting to know them and not just lobbing a question back and forth, which is what most people do. And so that is, it's knowing which of the stories about you want to tell, and not necessarily waiting for this person to ask you the perfect question so that you can finally say something. It's really knowing what is it about you that you want this person to know about you, what stories, what, specific things about you. And then how do you inspire that from the other person? And going out on a date is actually a very, very artful thing. And I think a lot of people are kind of like wing it. Like, I'm just going to see how I feel. I'm just going to like go on like 4 coffee dates. And I think that's actually a huge waste of time. You have to understand dating culture. And that is how you're going to thrive in it and have a good experience. But just sort of like, I understand why people do it, because it's like, oh, just put yourself out there. Just get on a dating app. Just do it.
And there is some value, I think, for somebody who's been just sitting at home staring at the walls, hoping and wishing.
But I guess like where I
Action
get concerned about is it's just that is like people do have a lot of hope around it and kind of just throwing spaghetti at the wall can actually demoralize somebody.
Interesting. Yeah.
I think it comes from a really good place. And I think that can be good in some instances. But I think it's really important for people to understand what's happened in dating before they get out there.
How does one prepare oneself to date?
Well, honestly, one of the first things that I do is people have to understand modern dating culture and the modern dating industry and what's happened.
What does that even mean?
And then that's like, well, you have to understand sort of like how the apps were developed, how they changed people. What is the typical person that you're going to meet? What have they probably gone through? What have they seen? What is the actual, like, what are the actual dynamics of it all out there? And I think that is so important. I think that the people who take the time to sort of understand that just fundamentally show up differently. I think they're fundamentally equipped in the same way that, like, you could go to a baseball game and not know anything, and you could still have a good time and you could still enjoy parts of it, but you'd be missing out if you didn't understand something about the mechanics of the game and the history and like what do people actually like about this thing. You can do that, but you're going to have a fundamentally different experience. And so, like, that's one of my favorite things to do with people, is just to watch their eyes light up when they just realize, wow, there's this whole history, there's this whole culture behind dating. And it's not just swipe, put your picture up. There's actually like so much to dig into that can really empower somebody.
Interesting. So it's collecting data so that you can feel more confident, not so that you can feel more overwhelmed. Because it sounds intimidating. Like there's this whole history of dating apps, and I have to understand all of that in order to get started.
I don't think you have to be a historian, but it would be like if anything, right? Like if you went to a new city or you went to tried a new cuisine, you might just want to have a little bit of sense of like what to look for, without, you don't have to go deep sea diving, but you at least want someone to like tell you what's in the pool and what to look out for.
That makes sense. And then once somebody has their foundational understanding, what do they do?
Well, then I think they try and figure out like how to make it work for them. And to not just have an online strategy, but to have like a holistic strategy for all the ways they're going to build connection into their lives, not just dating, but how are they going to build connection with their friends, with their neighbors, and then also dating. Like I think a lot of times people are just like, just tell me what app to go on. And I'm like, no, that's not it. Like, that's not it. There are some differences between the apps and they all have like a slightly different tone. And there's some that I would probably recommend to some other people, but it's like, it's kind of doing the stuff before that. Like, who do you want to be? How do you want to show up? What are the things that you're actually going to talk about? How do you connect? Right? Like maybe conversation isn't how you connect. Maybe you connect in some other way. And then how do we sort of design your dating strategy to highlight the things that really bring your personality out? So just a lot of things that I think are easy to overlook, but can fundamentally change, like not only how you date, but how long you're able to be out there. Because I think a lot of people, like, they get exhausted very quickly. And so it may take some time. And so it has to be something that you enjoy and are not trying to just like get out of this as quickly as possible, because that will have you making less than desirable decisions.
That makes sense. And so you talked about inviting people to think about that first question they are going to ask another person. And I think whether it's going to meet your neighbors or dating romantically, that opening is the hardest part. And it's what, in so many cases, deters us from putting ourselves out there. How do you help people think about how to engage when they're meeting someone new for the first time?
I don't like overthink it too much. I think the thing is, like, when I'm getting to know, like people that I work with, is kind of understanding what their strengths are. Do they like to open up with a joke? Do they like to point at something in the ambient and kind of make that the starting point? Instead of just saying, nice to meet you. Like sometimes people need almost like a third object. And that's how they lean in. So I don't think it's the same for everybody, but that's part of what I help people figure out, is what are the things that are uniquely them that help them connect with other people. So it's like a two-part equation.
Interesting. And is it the same for the story they want to share? How do people
No, it's all
generally
different.
decide?
It's all different. No, because everyone's different.
Yeah.
And like, if I'm working with an engineer, sometimes their tendency is to think that their job is boring or nobody wants to hear about it,
Uh-huh.
and that could not be further from the truth. And so sometimes I'll work with them to, like, I had this client and he was telling me about this like fireplace that he had to redesign, and it was connected to some like temperature or something, and what he needed help with was figuring out how to tell that story in a more concise way, and in a way that was not about the fireplace but about how his brain works
Mm,
and who he is as a person and how he problem solves. And so a lot
mm,
of times what I'm doing is helping people figure that out. Don't just say you're an engineer, which is what a
mhm,
lot of people might think to do. Let's find a way for you to say that you're an engineer that's actually interesting and is you,
mm,
and opens it up for the other person,
mhm,
to enter into the conversation.
mm. Yeah, and I imagine that's through understanding why you really care about being an engineer and where you find meaning in your work.
Right. But it's a thing that a lot of people sidestep. So I'm working at Match. I've studied so many first date conversations, and a lot of people just give responses and answers, and they don't think to really share the contours of who they are. They don't think to do that.
Everything you're saying, I feel like could just be directly translated to the job hunting experience.
Yes, it definitely can. There's definitely, it's just like, I feel like the stakes are different in dating. And sometimes there's an emotive element in dating that I think brings out something slightly different.
Mm-hmm. I see what you mean there. Yeah. It's all skills, though, that if we learn them, are valuable in all aspects of our lives.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So, what are some of the it's too late worries and fears that you encounter most often?
Yeah, that's such a good. I think the number one thing that I would say is like I have a lot of listeners and a lot of I have a very very even mix. It's like 40% men, 60% women, which is very unusual for a dating
Hmm.
podcast, which I'm super proud of. And then also like a pretty even mix of people that are divorced and then people who did not marry. And I think one of the biggest, I think, misconceptions is that if someone is in their 40s or 50s and they didn't get married, that they like don't want a relationship, or that they're like meant to be single, or that they're, and that's not necessarily true. What I actually see is some people, this is actually when they were meant to be in a relationship,
Hmm.
when there wasn't the deadline, when they're not making a decision. And I'm not saying everyone, but they're not making a decision under duress. And so sometimes they confuse, oh, well, I didn't get married, so maybe I'm just one of those people that's perma single. And there
Hmm.
are people that are definitely, that is their best life. A single life is their best life. But I think there's a much bigger cohort of people. No, actually, this is great for you. This is your moment. This is
Hmm.
when you might best be suited for a relationship and to explore dating.
I love that. And I think that plays so directly to this idea of being a late bloomer, right? So
Yeah,
we
exactly.
only think that domain of our lives was defined in our 20s because there was a lot of storytelling that said this domain of your life is defined in your
100%.
20s. And you're saying, oh no, we're going to redefine it in
Yes.
our 30s, 40s, 50s, 70s.
Totally. And I think what you just said is spot on. There's all this storytelling
Hmm.
about how the 20s is when we're supposed to find it. And so if we didn't, there's something wrong with us, or maybe I'm just going to be single forever. And I just really believe that I think we can experience all of it. I think we can be like fully single and enjoy all of that. I think we can be in a casual relationship. I think we can be in a very deep relationship. And one of the things I always love to share with people is that when I was at Match, I was mentored by Dr. Helen Fisher, who was the foremost anthropologist and researcher of romantic love. I literally built my career around this woman. I like worshiped her, and it was like a dream to work with her when I was at Match. And she had such an inclusive, broad based view of love. And this is the woman who is the expert in romantic love. And she found love at the age of 72
Hmm.
and got married at 75 and then passed away at 78. And that doesn't mean that everyone's going to have to wait that long, but like we talked about this a lot. And we both talked about how this idea that there's one window is just so destructive.
Hmm.
And she had like one of the most incredible relationships I've ever seen. And it was at 72.
How beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to say that it is impossible to predict the future of our relationships based on the moment we're in now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the thing there is to be open to the
Uh-huh.
possibility.
Uh-huh.
Because she also had to be open to the possibility. She could have very easily been like, "Hey,
Yes.
well, I'm 72. I guess it's me and my bridge club, or she plays bridge. That's actually accurate. But to always have that part of you, not yearning and thinking that your life is incomplete, but also being open to it. And I think that's a very, very like beautiful dance that I
Mm.
also hope to inspire in people. You can be both. You can be like totally happy being single and also be open to this possibility at the same time.
Say more.
So I think our culture loves labels,
Yep.
and it's
And
like,
binaries.
yes. And I think people, especially in dating, they're either like on or off,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to sort of like always, having this continuous like, vibration and frequency open to anything. And I understand why it's hard, right? It feels like when you're looking for, you have to sort of actively announce like, I'm looking for a relationship, I'm looking for a partner. But I've just noticed, like, I mean, that can work. But I think as you get older and you don't have, a deadline, and you are going to be, I mean, one of the most interesting things in the 40s and 50s is, how many people are coming back into circulations, for lack of a better word. And you just don't know when it's going to happen or who's going to show up. And I think that is like really, can be really exciting, but you have to be like open to it.
I'm glad you brought up the supply and demand. Because I think that that's one of the things that comes up a lot is
Hmm.
there's low supply available. And so part of the reason we think we've run out of time is because we feel like we've run out of candidates. I'm
Hmm.
making this sound like super clinical and
That's
professional now.
okay.
I'll push my glasses up on my nose. But you're right. It's changing all the time.
It's changing all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just different. And I think, again, like this idea of like yearning for how it used to be is
Mm-hmm.
just like not a helpful exercise. It's different. And then, because if you're just looking at volume, like it's never going to be like that again. But if you're understanding that like it is a dynamically changing dating pool at all times, that's different.
Yeah. I love too that you're alluding to something that I feel like I hear so often women, especially, talk about.
Hmm.
At a certain age, they become invisible
Hmm.
and that they are no longer seen as a, a romantic partner or
Hmm.
someone desirable, or losing their own feeling of being desirable. Well, how true is that based on
Yeah.
your,
I understand it, and it's also not what I see.
yeah,
Yeah. And if you, any really, really good dating coach or anyone who's like studied dating intensively disagrees with that statement. And I understand why people say it. So like I
yeah,
totally get why you're saying it. I think one, like, look, there's always going to be a group of people that are just like, I want to date someone way younger than me,
mhm,
right? There's always going to be that. I don't see that. I really don't. I see a lot of people actually who want to deeply connect at this point in their lives, and they actually would like a peer. I think sometimes, though, it's being able to connect as peers that
mm,
is the art,
mm.
right? And knowing how to sort of still find space. So it doesn't feel like you're at the end of your story, you're still at the beginning of your story. So sometimes I think people confuse youth for someone that just feels like there's excitement about the future. That's really what people are drawn to. It's not the
Mhm,
youth part. And I
mhm,
think people confuse that with just younger
mhm,
people typically are more excited about the future. And that is a very magnetic quality.
mhm,
And it's
mhm.
that is what is drawing people in. There are plenty of people in their 40s and 50s that have a lot of excitement about the future, but not as many as, like, it's not as common of a quality, to be honest. And that
Mhm.
is one thing that I work with people on, is like there has to be genuine excitement about the future, and not like, oh, all I want to do now is play shuffleboard and like,
Unless you love shuffleboard, and that's like super thrilling, right? But
if it is,
if
but I'm
people
saying,
just want to look at TikTok all day, that's
think
probably not so
I think if
exciting.
you're talking, especially in 40s, 50s, it's different when you get to your 70s. But if you're talking about your life like you're winding down, which a lot of
Mhm.
people do
Mhm.
subconsciously,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is not exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. I was really lucky to be raised by a woman who, when I was born, she was in her 50s and reinventing herself and learning new skills constantly and challenging herself creatively, and started her first business in her 50s. And all the women in my family that I grew up around lived until their mid 90s and were doing big brave things the entire time. And so I just assumed that 50 was kind of the halfway point.
Mm-hmm.
And so this thought that like people turn it off at 50, I'm like, huh, fascinating. I
Yes.
was like, oh, no, no,
Yeah.
no. We're just getting started, girls.
Yes. Yeah. And I think sometimes people have this energetic approach towards like their business, or maybe something, want to start a business, but then or a career, but then they don't feel that way about their romantic life. And so
Mhm.
I would love to see that shift.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. And so, if you were to give one piece of advice based on all of, not that anybody likes advice, but one insight maybe, based on all of your years of studying this
Hmm.
to the folks listening, what would you say?
Learn how to talk about yourself.
And to get started with that?
Listen to how you respond to the question. It's not a great question, so tell me about yourself, right? Like it's not a great question, but it is how like a lot of
It's an
people, whether that's a
invitation.
job or
Yeah.
dating, or you meet your new neighbor, like, so what do you do, or tell me about yourself. Those may not be the greatest questions, but they are the most common questions.
Mhm.
So we have to deal with that.
Mhm.
We can't magically hope that that's going to stop. That is what you are fed. And instead of, being like, oh, I wish people asked better questions, have better answers, have better
Mhm.
stories, have better ways to talk about yourself, and listen to that. What do
Mhm.
you say? Do you say, oh, I'm a teacher and I taught for 15 years and, I love my students? Or are you telling a story about the day in your classroom when everything changed?
Mhm.
That is like probably the number one thing that I equip my clients with, is when they show up on a date, they have like 15 magnetic stories, and
Hmm.
they may or may not share all of them,
Mhm.
but they are ready to go.
It's almost as if they learn to date themselves first.
I think that's a great way to put it. I think a lot of people don't know how amazing they are.
Yeah.
Like even the guy with the engineer, like he's telling me this story. I'm on the edge of my seat. And he doesn't understand. I'm like, wait, hold on. It's Thanksgiving. This fire, this what? It's connected to the HVAC system, and you like figure this all out. And he's like, yeah. And like, and he's not an exception. Like people tell me their stories, and like, I'm dealing with people that have jobs that, on paper may or may not be considered interesting, like, lawyers and accountants. And when they get into the weeds and they nerd out, and they're like, no, there was this coding error in the invoice system. And they would never think about telling that on a date. And they absolutely should.
I love that. I love that. It's like if we can see how interesting and magical we are, we can offer that to other people as a gift and hopefully see them and
Yeah, and
their
then you're
interesting,
you're gonna
magical
yeah, you're gonna
uniqueness.
inspire that in someone else. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes people think that those stories are supposed to be told later. And I'm
Huh.
like, no, like out of the gate, let's go.
I mean, it's a good reason that people often talk about someone's humor or the amazing stories that they tell when they talk about why they fell in love with someone.
Yes. And right now it's so hard. And also, I mean, one other thing that I would say back to your other question is that, like, one other thing I tell people, if they can, is stay off your phone
Mm-hmm.
for about 2 hours before a date. Like maybe
Mm-hmm.
just text because you have to, but don't look at anything. Like, so other thing is, like, people are showing up on their dates and their little hearts and brains have been in the social media screen blender all day.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard to say that, to really appreciate how that really impacts people. And so that's part of another reason why I tell people to really understand dating culture. Like, you're coming to someone, not only have they been maybe on like 6 dates that week that didn't go so great, or they're like, talking to other people, but like we don't know what they've been like snorting on their screens, and how that affects them.
Yeah.
And so like that is like a tip that I give to a lot of people, that they are like blown away at how it changes things. Just stay off your phone for 2 hours before a date.
It's like Julia Cameron from The Artist's Way talking about the media detox if you want to reignite creativity.
Yes. And I think people forget that it's just as important in dating. It really will change you. Like your blood pressure will go down. You won't be as, distracted. It's one thing to like come and like put your phone away and put it on airplane mode. It's quite another to show up kind of like.
Yeah. Yeah. Instead of bathed in everybody else's crap. So every guest on the Uplifters nominates another guest. Who would you like to nominate?
I want to my best friend, Stephanie Kelly.
Tell me about Stephanie.
Like I will tear up just thinking about how much I love her. Her birthday is in 2 weeks, and we had a reunion with some of our old coworkers in January, and she had said afterwards, she's like, "Oh, it'd be so fun." And I was like, "What?" I was like, "If we had a book club with like John and Doug and Kurt, these three guys we used to work with." And I was like, So for her birthday, I'm giving her a surprise book club. John, Doug, and Kurt are going to show up. And we have picked a book that I know she's read. Aww. And they're going to read the book, and then we're going to have a book club. So I'm like so excited to do this for her. But she's just like, there's no one outside of my family that I just feel like has my back at every moment and is always like rooting for me. And we've been best friends for like 15 years. And she's just a remarkable person. Like,
oh, that's really beautiful. I'll make sure not to announce this before her birthday so that we can not spoil the surprise. What, as uplifters, we love to uplift other uplifters. How can we support you in your work?
Like I have like a bigger mission. I always want and hope for people to sort of believe in romantic hope. This is this concept that has run through all of my work. And it's not about being in a relationship. It's not about getting married. It's just sort of this idea of leading and living a romantic life, however that looks like for you. So I think that's.
What does that look like for you?
For me, that is always having my heart open. And I just feel like it's a really hard time to be a human right now. I think being a human is not easy. And so whenever possible, I try to go analog, whether that's organizing a book club for my best friend and surprise. And like, even that, like remembering that she said that and then wanting to make it happen. And then it took courage for me to email these guys and be like, "Hey, I have an idea." And they were instantly like, "Oh my God, I'm in. I'm always paying attention for how I can make something a little bit more human, a little bit more handcrafted, a little bit more artisanal. That's what I'm doing right now to offset this world of like screens and texts and all that.
I love that. That does sound like a romantic life. And I definitely feel better when the majority of my hours each day are not spent staring at a screen, even though I'm staring at a screen doing super meaningful stuff with other humans super intimately. I also need lots of toes in the dirt time.
Yes.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And I think that's also part of it is like, I think I'm very back to your question about like, what does a romantic life look like? I mean, it looks everything from like watching my screen time, making sure I have paper time and sun time and neighbor time. And little things like I just moved back to my hometown in October, and I made a list of like all the people that I definitely want to build a relationship with now that I'm here. I'm trying not to just wait for it to happen, but actually saying, no, you are meaningful to me and I want to connect with you, and not just assuming it's going to happen, but really carving out time for those people.
Just asking ourselves what we want and who we want to be is a really powerful step.
Absolutely.
Both in dating and in cultivating other relationships and aspects of our lives.
Exactly. And even like what I'm describing to me is a form of dating.
Yeah.
Right. The book club, the neighbors. I intentionally moved into a building where one of my friends lives. I didn't pick a random building. I was like, I want to live where my friend lives. So those choices, I think, are part of living a romantic life.
It was really good to see you again, my lovely friend. Thanks for watching the Uplifters podcast. If this inspired you, hit subscribe and tap the bell to stay uplifted. Give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs a little lift today. Big love.
Painted water sunshine with rosemary and thyme. Dwell in the perplexing, though you find it vexing. Toss a star and hover, be your own best lover. Relish in a new prime, plant a tree in springtime. Dance with idle hindsight, bring the sun to twilight.